I've obviously been coming to XpoNorth for probably over 10 years, and I guess I've been working in visual media and kind of like doing music for film and TV for, I'd say maybe like 15 years, something like that, a very long time. My background is that I used to be in bands, and as a result of putting music out into the public domain, a small publisher took a couple of my songs and synced them into a couple of TV shows around the turn of the century, around the year 2000, into Malcolm in the Middle, which was a big show in America, kind of, I suppose, like a live action version of The Simpsons, and Sesame Street, obviously kind of beloved kids TV show. I didn't study music. I didn't really know how to do score or working music to picture. I was just one of those people, like maybe many of you, who was just a a musician and somebody who wanted to kind of write music and tour and be in bands and kind of get in the van, all that sort of stuff that you kind of think is what the life of a musician would be when you're 14 and 15, as I was, listening to, bands like The Cure and The Smiths and just wanting to live that sort of dream. But and as I've said, when I've been at XpoNorth before, what happened to me, I suppose, was even though I was in the van and I was going on tour and I was doing all this sort of stuff, there was something about my music which seemed to be working to picture. So as I said, without any kind of formal training and having had some of my music used in my TV shows quite kind of accidentally, I suppose I started thinking about how I could, write music for picture. I suppose if you think about how it works, there's basically 3 different types of music that get used in a TV show or a film or an animation like this, which I'm working on today. And those 3 types of music are specially commissioned music. So that's composed music, which is what I do. Then there is sync, and sync is that kind of, sort of most ubiquitous of words, which is where an artist or a band is, forgive me, you will know this, has a piece of music, and then, a music supervisor who is, a music gatekeeper, let's say, who's working between a production or a studio or a television show or an advertisement or a video game, then can kind of place that music in a film or TV show. That is a very kind of like simplistic view of how these things work, and I'll go into that a little bit more in a minute. But and then the third type of music is production music, or what is called library music. Library music is, as most of you know, it's just people who sit, a bit like composers in rooms like this, and just write instrumental music that they then will filter through an aggregator. It could be a publisher or it could be a production music label towards pictures. So I had come from this background of playing bands and doing music that I thought was, to be consumed by people in venues and at festivals and, go and play Rock Nest or places like that. And actually what I found out was actually, well, maybe some of the music I was making just had this kind of thing that was working and was kind of compelling towards pictures. So having not particularly liked being in the van anyway, I was quite happy to sort of pivot. And, in this house, which I now ironically find myself back in because of the pandemic, setting up a small studio and starting to write what I just thought was kind of underscore music, which was music, that I could hear in TV shows, and then started just pitching out, pitch to people. And over the course of 10 or 15 years, now the company's Score Draw Music, which I run, has grown to now 6 composers. And yeah, some of you kind of seen the bio that we put on Twitter or whatever, then you'll know that we work across a lot of television, a lot of animation, a lot of kids stuff. I'm very lucky to do work in advertising for people like Adidas. And because I went to university in Edinburgh, and I've always had very strong links with Scotland, that part of the world, being in bands with people who are Scottish. I found myself going to XpoNorth for about the last 10 years and always moderating the sync panels. So we find ourselves today in 2020, looking at opportunities, not only in terms of what is happening in the sector in an overarching sense, but also what's happening during the pandemic. I mentioned this thing about music supervisors, and Alex and everybody at XpoNorth have been really good about bringing lots of music supervisors to come up and meet all of you. And I'm just going to presume that most of you are based in the Highlands and Islands, because that's where this call out came from. And it's been a kind of interesting thing. I found it interesting as a kind of music and image practitioner, looking at the kind of way in which the role of music supervisors has sort of changed completely over the last 20 years. And what has kind of happened now in 2020 more than ever, I feel, is that music supervisors have sort of become, they're kind of almost like rock stars. Obviously, they are these people who hold so much kind of power in terms of, if you're a music supervisor on, Killing Eve, or the music supervisor on, HBO drama, you have this kind of opportunity, or as is seen through the kind of lens of the media, to be able to take, seemingly completely unknown music and, break it by pairing it up with something, a great scene or a great montage. So then obviously for emerging music practitioners, this has become a really compelling thing to look at. But one of the things that I've been trying to do over the last, number of years is sort of kind of try and deconstruct that and think about what it really means in terms of emerging talent trying to pitch towards these opportunities. Because it is one thing for a music supervisor to come into a session and go, oh, I love new music. It's fantastic. And, I'm always so willing and open to kind of accept, your kind of drives or your CDs or whatever of your new music. But actually, if you really start to think about this, most music supervisors get over 1,000 emails a day. And, it's, could it really be the case that the one moment, the one day, the 1 hour, the 1 minute that you email or meet one of these people in person, that it just happens that of the 10 or 15 tracks as an independent artist that you kind of have or own the rights to or want to pitch, that at the exact same time, that music supervisor is looking for that exact piece of music. I mean, even just to kind of say it, it sort of seems sort of slightly foolish. It's like, well, how could it be this this easy just to kind of find these people, these gatekeepers, and then pitch your music towards them. So I'm very, very much of a mind that there are ways in which emerging, and I'm talking about sync now, I'm talking about people who are bands or who are wanting to do this as a kind of revenue stream, as opposed to people like me who are composers for whom, we're commissioned to write this music. So that's kind of like, that's a different thing to sync. And a lot of people think there's a kind of gray area between composers and people who are in bands or artists who just, believe that this could be a compelling kind of revenue stream. So I like to sort of keep a point of distinction between those two things for people who are holding emerging repertoire. So how can they genuinely feel like they can avail of some of these opportunities and have their music, if nothing else, kind of have a seat at the table? Whenever I was in these bands and I was kind of trying to kind of make my way as a musician before I got into this, I always personally felt that I would sleep easier at night if the music that I was doing at least was being looked at by people. The thing that feels the worst, I think, for a musician, an emerging musician, is if they feel that, their music is not even getting out into the hands of people or aggregators or trusted kind of, interlopers between an opportunity and them. You've got to feel that at least you had a seat at the table. And that's what I believe with sync as well, and with opportunities for people wanting to place music. And that what you need, it's one thing to have, to place your CD or to place your drive or your email in the hands of a music supervisor. But if the truth is that actually they go away and they just go back to their trusted friends at Cobol and Universal and EMI and Sony and whatnot, then kind of what's that sort of achieved? And yet we just keep on hearing, oh, music supervisors, music gatekeepers, we have to kind of like, we need to be kind of cognizant of this opportunity, and we need to kind of be at the front of the line whenever there are situations where music can can maybe go the distance and be placed into something. So the first thing I want to say about that for emerging artists is that I feel that it's extremely important. Well, let's start and very quickly go that every piece of music, as all of you guys know, is, if I had a coin here, I should have been better prepared, but I don't. Imagine I'm holding up a coin. Imagine I'm holding up a 10-pence piece. And that's what a piece of music is like, because obviously it's a single thing, but it has two sides, has two rights. One is the right of the master recording, one is the right of the publishing or the composition. The totality of these two rights is what you're pitching towards an opportunity. And if you don't hold or can rep 100% of both of these parts of the opportunity, then you're not going to have the opportunity to place your music to a music supervisor or anybody who is a kind of, you know, somebody who is part of this sort of mechanism going towards an opportunity, because you're not holding or representing 100% of the rights in the master recording or 100% of the rights in the composition. So often people will say, well, what about public domain music? What about, you know, a traditional reel that, you know, has existed for hundreds of years, and I can just do a recording of that and I can, you know, make that in a studio, and then I will own both sides of that. I will own the master recording. I will also own the, you know, the piece of publishing, because it's a public domain piece of music. And again, as I'm sure you all know, with anything that is public domain or music that is from, you know, traditional music, it's very important that you feel that you've made a unique and copyrightable arrangement. It's a real misunderstanding if you were doing, you know, Beethoven's Ninth and you did a recording that was just da 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 da. You know, that arrangement of that piece of repertoire has been copyrighted by someone else, even though the repertoire, you know, is from 200 or 300 years ago. So you need to be able to hold or control, you know, 100% of both sides in order to even start to think about whether your music can travel on this journey towards placement. The next things, and again, forgive me if you know all this already, I'll just rattle through it. Obviously, if your music isn't registered with the Performance Rights Organization, PRS, if it isn't registered with the PPL, if it isn't registered with MCPS, and I know MCPS can be tricky in terms of the hoops you have to jump through, your music will struggle to travel towards, especially in the UK, broadcasters like Channel 4, ITV, BBC, whose music use is conditioned under the blanket license agreement. The blanket license being that these broadcasters pay PRS for music, you know, a certain amount of money every year. And in the BBC's case, that allows them to license over 200,000 different pieces of copyright every week. If your music is not kind of registered with all these people, when it gets to that point whereby it's in, you know, whatever, Cafe in EastEnders or MasterChef, it will get stuck, because what will happen is the information will be put into the internal BBC music clearance software, and they will go, oh, this stuff isn't registered. So then it will stop at that point, and then it will not move forward. And that will be kind of the end of the life of the piece of music. So again, forgive me, this is kind of basic stuff, but if you don't get this stuff right, then we can't move on to the sort of more interesting stuff. So all those things are incredibly important. Some other kind of real basic stuff, you know, in any studio or home recording setup, if you're doing any kind of music with vocals as well, you would obviously always bounce out the full mix and the instrumental and the a cappella, so that an editor can cut between a vocal and an instrumental version of a song. That's a really annoying thing if editors can't do that. So that's important as well. And then you kind of start to move on to kind of broader points. And this is where I think things start to become a little bit more interesting, because you start to ask yourself questions. Well, the first question would be, where can I hear music that is like my music? In other words, is there a kind of a place where repertoire that I make, and the idea of it working and being compelling towards media has been validated? So, you know, for example, gosh, I don't know if it was, well, you go back to the Killing Eve thing, I guess. If you were, you know, if you were doing dark kind of female fronted, say, sounded a little bit like a band like Sons and Daughters, or some of the kind of darker stuff from Chemical Underground, and you were thinking, oh, well, okay, I can hear that music like mine is being used in these places, so I know that there's the potential for routes to market. And equally, if I'm pitching to other people, I can be like, okay, in the last 6 months, music like mine has been used in The Good Wife, or music like mine has been used in, CSI Miami. Or a lot of people kind of put the horse slightly before the cart when it comes to sync, and because they've heard about the opportunity, and because within the kind of, messaging that comes from the music industry across conferences, the Great Escape, XpoNorth, Liverpool, stuff that we do in Ireland, sync is always a kind of stream. It's always in a lane. It's like, oh, well, there must be a place for my music to avail of this revenue stream. And that's, that is clearly not always the case. The flip side of that, as kind of mentioned already, is, well, okay, well, what if I wrote music that was kind of like sync friendly? What if I, picked up the ukulele and started writing sort of twee songs that had the word home in the title a lot, for example? Are there things to do with lyrics that I can embed into my music and my writing, and give me the opportunity to maybe kind of get closer to, for example, advertisements, when, as we all know, there are kind of lyrical things that reoccur in advertising all the time that, many kind of, a cynic would go, okay, well, if I do write a lot of songs that are about home, or they're about new, or they're about the future, or they're about change, all these kind of like slightly meaningless non sequiturs that equally just seem to kind of appear all the time in in advertising, then will that give me more of an opportunity? And that's where I come to kind of thinking then about authenticity. And this is a kind of, in some ways, a sort of monstrous cliche, but it's also a truism as well, is that, if you work as a kind of music supervisor, you work as one of these music gatekeepers, you can kind of see through music really quickly, because your job, apart from all the administration and all that kind of stuff that, is what makes a piece of music go the distance or not, everything else that you're doing is about kind of trying to find things to do with authenticity. So if the music that you're writing isn't authentic, you kind of struggle to believe whether it will actually go the distance. That's what I believe anyway. So I think you can be too knowing about kind of trends that seem to be working. I think that can oftentimes be a mistake, and certainly it always, to me, feels really explicitly obvious whenever I come across pieces of music that I feel are coming out from artists, but seem to just have kind of like too much of a sort of cognizance of, oh, I could maybe look at this revenue stream, because I've written songs that, have these sort of lyrical, it's kind of like it sort of sits in a sort of apex between kind of like ambiguity and sort of general meaninglessness, which means it can sit under any scene and just lyrically bubble away, not be kind of invasive or intrusive, but work under lots of different situations. And that, that to me is kind of repertoire that is sort of inauthentic. So then the next thing is, okay, so if it is the case then that, with music supervisors and music gatekeepers, that they're, this music is coming at them, it's kind of like a, 3D spatial bombardment of music from all over the place. How can, what are the other ways in which I can cut through? Obviously, I mentioned about kind of like seeking places where music that is similar to yours is validated within the marketplace. That's a really important thing. Other things that people kind of come and ask me about are, for example, what about independent publishers, such as Centric Music are a good example. They've been to XpoNorth a lot. And when when Simon Persas first came to XpoNorth, I think Centric maybe had 14,000 pieces of repertoire. They now have, it's in the millions. Is it of benefit to be attached to an independent publisher? And the answer to that, I would say, is it absolutely can be of benefit. But like anything else, you have to be on the mind of the sync teams that exist within these independent publishers so that you can still potentially avail of opportunity. Kind of, let me put it this way. If you went to one of these publishing portals where you sign up your repertoire and it's ingested into the system, and against a kind of percentage, they will collect all of your revenue streams and offer you the opportunity towards sync. And these people have very, very active sync departments. It's still going to be the case that when the brief comes in, if they're thinking about their music, it's because something else has happened and you've dropped a little line to the sync team saying, oh, hey, everybody, just kind of checking in. So interesting. Vic Galloway actually had us in session last week and it was really good. And we're about to, do a showcase at, Wide Days, whatever, in 6 weeks' time. And that's it. Just a little kind of tiny check-in email so that you can kind of just basically, I suppose, like stimulate small amounts of ongoing interest. Independent publishers can be amazing because the sync teams within them do work really hard. But it's just simply not enough to be able to kind of take your music and drop it in and then expect that you will kind of start to grind out sync, because it simply doesn't work that way. In any of these scenarios, there's a certain amount of obligation whereby the rights holder, that's you people, have to be more active in how you stimulate opportunity. So the next thing, and this is kind of like close to independent publishers, are music agents. So for those of you who don't know, a music agent is somebody who has the right to represent and pitch repertoire towards sync without actually owning either the master recording or the publishing. So an example of one in America, if you want to Google what one looks like, is a company called Secret Road in America. They're a good sync agent. An example of one in the UK would be a company like Woodwork Music. That's a good example, Woodwork Music in the UK. So sync agents, really interesting. It's extremely competitive to get a sync agent to represent your repertoire. Like anything, it's competitive. The reason for this is, like music supervisors, they're constantly being pitched new music. But again, if you can find a sync agent who's holding repertoire that sounds similar to yours, and you've done all this other kind of belt and braces stuff, then you can absolutely go and knock on the door and pitch. The way it will work is, in any successful pitch that they kind of get for you, they will take, quite a large amount of equity against any fees that come in, and also they could get involved in the publishing as well. I personally always feel like that is extremely fair. Do I want 100% of nothing, or am I happy to give away a certain percentage because, Secret Road got me a placement on, a Netflix Sabrina reboot, which Secret Road did for me. And I was like, yep, you can take that percentage. That is completely cool. I'm delighted. Thank you. Music agents, the interesting thing about music agents, and this is something very obvious to say, is that they only get paid if they find you work. So there's nothing else that's making them money other than pitch towards music supervisors and landing placements. In my mind, they seem like pretty good people to try and get to know, because, you get paid, they get paid. If it doesn't work, then there's no money. So you could maybe look at music agents that exist in the UK or in North America. Some exist in a non-exclusive way. Some are exclusive. I think exclusive is slightly better, because non-exclusive, you could be pitched by two different music agents, and then music supervisors like, oh, this is bloody awkward because you sent me that song and you sent me the exact same song. This doesn't feel very good. So I think that is, I kind of think anything like that can give you the opportunity to cut through these different kind of sways of encumbrance and get you closer to that thing that I was saying before, which is like the seat at the table. That, those have got to be things that you look at, because, it's just this idea that kind of blindly pitching to supervisors your music, like that is, as I said already, it's just those two sine waves crossing over. That is tough. Now, that said, obviously. In the UK, it's interesting the way television works because we have these blanket licenses. There are lots and lots and lots and lots of opportunities within the BBC, you know, within Channel 4, ITV, to have your music travel to, you know, be, you know, a piece of underscore in the cafe in EastEnders, or a piece of underscore on one of these kind of reality Love Island type TV shows. For things like that, I would suggest to you, it is not hard to find out who the music supervisors of shows like that are. They are actually quite visible. A good way maybe of getting a sense of the totality of the sync landscape in the UK in terms of music agents, music supervisors, music departments within the BBC, ITV, and whatnot. If you go into Music Week, their website, then go to the page for a thing called the Music Week Sync Awards. If you find that page and find like the 2019 awards and then 2018 awards, 2017 awards, or whatever, and then go through all the people who were listed in terms of potentially, you know, shortlisted to win an award, and then the people who won. Everybody who was in the room that night is a music and image gatekeeper within the UK, whether they are, you know, Peter Bradbury, who's head of music at Sky, or Nikki Bignell, who's very senior in the BBC's music copyright team, or Catherine Grimes from the BBC as well, or it was Karen Craig, who was head of music at ITV and was over things like Love Island and had 3 music supervisors working on Love Island, I think. She is now head of music at Netflix. So you can start, you know, if you have the appetite and enthusiasm, you can start to kind of like, you know, it's a bit like the Matrix. It's like, I can start to see it. I can start to see how it all works. I can start to see how that person is a music agent, and then they pitch to this person who was on the show, and then this person was the kind of head of music, and then this was the broadcaster, and this was the independent publisher, and this was the kind of copyright holder. And there's a sort of, you know, there's a sort of logic that starts to kind of unpick itself and allow you, you know, if you love the show like Fortitude, and we're like, oh God, you know, that stuff is incredible. So the trailer for Fortitude was done by Sky's in-house trailers team, but there was an independent UK music supervisor who was on the show. So you can be like, oh, okay, well, I really love the trailer because it had this Daniel Johnson song in it that, you know, and I do music similar to that. Or I really love the kind of music supervision within the show. That's a different person. So, you know, I know it's blindingly obvious, but, you know, research like this, you know, it just shows that when, you know, if you do want to do that email, which is like, hey, you know, Catherine Grimes, you know, music supervisor, great music supervisor for Killing Eve, or Zoe, who music supervises, who's going to be coming to XpoNorth this year, who music supervises stuff like Derry Girls and does a lot of work for, does Riviera for Sky One. You know, you could be like, hey, I really love that placement that you did in Derry Girls of this track. I actually, funnily enough, I have music that's a bit similar. It's a one-stop. If you use the phrase one-stop, that means that you own 100% of both sides of the piece of music, and it's good to go. Those emails to music supervisors, really smart, really well researched. You're only emailing them because you're like, look, I know that you, you know, music supervise Peaky Blinders and blah, 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 but I have got a dark gothic cover of, you know, Red Right Hand by Nick Cave. And I've been to Cobalt, which is Nick Cave's publisher, and I've, you know, sent them my cover, and like the guys in the Sing team, they really like it, and I'm just kind of letting you know that it's out there, and that's, you know, and that's all I want to do. Have a great day. You know, those emails are the emails that are much more likely to be responded to for all the kind of obvious reasons. In the same way as, you know, for anybody, you know, for, you know, if you're pitching Vic Galloway, you know, a piece of music, and you say, hey Vic, oh man, you see when you played that Pastel song on the show last week? Oh my God, I love that. You know, it just shows that you're, you know, it's not that blind BCCing thing. Another thing that's probably worth talking about for a second is, yeah, Taxi. Obviously, some of you be aware of things like Taxi, where you pay for the opportunity to have your music pitched. this is just, well, all these are, you know, my personal opinions. But I would say, I kind of believe that I don't think you should have to pay. You know, I think it's ridiculous to think that, you know, person A's music, you know, will go further down the line because he paid $10 to do a pitch as opposed to person B's. You know, in what parallel universe would it be the case that, you know, someone would pick a piece of music because somebody paid? So you can certainly look at things like Taxi. Personally, I'm kind of not into Taxi. A couple of other things that are worth kind of talking about. So one thing that is happening at the moment, what's happening in the pandemic in terms of kind of commissioning and advertising and different strands of media and where things are. For the work that we do in composition, anything to do with live action, that all stopped in March. So any stuff that we were on or about to go on, you know, that's all been furlonged, whatever the word is, until the autumn. Animation work that we're doing, this is a show that we do for PBS Kids in America, that's all continuing. You know, I can see, you know, on a daily basis, you know, everything to do with trailers and whatnot being pushed back until the autumn. So I guess it's like, okay, well, so what are the opportunities now? What type of work is going on now? What sort of work is being commissioned now for people like the BBC? And this is maybe more interesting for people who are thinking about being, you know, doing work as a composer. They're obviously, the BBC are commissioning through independent production companies lots of content which is driven by archive, because it means they don't have to go out and commission doing any new filming. So if you imagine, you know, all those kind of like, you know, 1 hour, 90 minutes, BBC Three, BBC Two, you know, all that sort of stuff, there's lots and lots of that production happening at the moment. And there will be more in the future. A lot of that stuff will be scored, but a lot of it will use production music or library music. I want to talk about library music for a second. I want to talk specifically to all of you people who maybe are musicians or composers, and you're just interested in doing more writing and having more possible opportunities for your work. You should look at library music or production music. Production music was always the kind of, I felt like it was always, you know, 10 or 15 years ago, the kind of poor cousin of sync and of composed music. The reason for this was, you know, sync was always about this amazing moment where you had the kind of like, you know, I don't know, the bloody harp cover of, you know, Heroes by David Bowie, and then the kind of Guinness horses were on the beach, and it was just like, oh, it was just meant to be. These two things are meant to happen together. And then obviously composed music is composed music. So, you know, it's written to pictures. So there's a kind of like compelling kind of fusing of two distinct kind of types of creativity. So those things were always sort of quite valued. Whereas production music, library music, was always seen as being like, oh, that's the kind of cheap alternative. You just go to kind of a production library and just get some kind of, you know, little bits of kind of wobbly, you know, 2-minute pieces of underscore. That's not the case. And there are many composers in the UK, North America, and around the world who are making great livings just doing library music or percussion music. So what this means is, in the most basic sense, I would say, okay, I want to do a library of kind of like, I don't know, flipping mellow acoustic rock. It's a really bad example, but anyway, so I would just go to my studio like this. I would write, it used to be kind of 10 or 15 pieces of music. A library album can now be as small as kind of 6 to 8 pieces of music. The longest iteration of the music would be about 2 minutes 20. Then I would cut it down to, you know, 1 minute 30, 1 minute 60, 30, 20 seconds, 10 seconds. I would make stems, individual channels. You know, one of the drums, one of the bass, one of the guitar. And then I would either take it to a big library, or I would service it myself. I would do all my registrations. I would service it myself to, you know, editors in BBC Alba and editors in BBC Scotland. And maybe I would get, you know, my mate Barry to do some amazing fiddle on it, so it felt, you know, fully authentic. And I would call it, I don't know, Island Acoustic Trad or something. You know, and you can kind of hear, even in the pitching of it, it's like, oh, is that really a thing? But it absolutely is a thing. library production music in this period where we're all in isolation and lockdown. This is an amazing time for this kind of productivity. And I know that there are many people who are using this opportunity these months or weeks or however long it ends up being, where they're kind of at home, or, you know, like me back in a home studio, to create library albums. There are a series of really awesome articles all about library music on a website called Sound on Sound. I'm pretty sure they're written by a guy called Dan Graham, who runs several production music companies. His most famous one is called Gothic Storm. He works a lot in servicing production music into television and film trailers and whatnot. So, you know, whereas you can do the sync thing and with the kind of artist music, try and get it placed, or you can do the composer thing, which I haven't really talked about, and I'll talk about for a second, and then we're going to move on to Q&A. The third way is to do production music. To do, you know, that's how I started. I didn't even know that I was doing production music. I was just kind of writing instrumental underscore, but I was sending, you know, pieces of music, you know, 17 tracks, each one about 2 minutes long, all instrumental, all kind of sounding like stuff that I heard on the TV, sending it to, you know, independent production companies. And obviously, for those of you based in the Highlands and Islands, there, you know, there are plenty of, you know, bloody hell, I could like tell you production companies that exist around there because I've seen them doing presentations at XpoNorth, and then start servicing directly to people production music that is PRS, MCPS, and PPL cleared, that is authentic, that is presented in the right way, and, you know, people are crying out for music like this to edit to. The important thing about any kind of production music, and I would encourage you, if you want to look at this more, there are plenty of, you know, go to Gothic Storm, or go to EMI production music, or go to Imogen production music, or go to Cavendish music, and start to just kind of look at all their production music and listen to it. It's amazing. But you'll really learn how they kind of make these pieces of music, and then how they cut them down, and then how they make them into stems. There are also places, for example, Sky Television have an in-house production music company called SATV? No, SATV, I think. And they will pitch out, you know, we're doing an album called, you know, Magical Orchestral, and you, as you know, you can pitch in, write some music. You'll get a fee if you end up on the production album, and then obviously, because it's in Sky's kind of in-house you know, system, it's more likely that it will be used in terms of for promos, or you know, in content, and it's worth kind of, you know, in as much as everybody wants that sort of, and I've said this before, Cafe and EastEnders style placement, or Killing Eve, or whatever. Promos, you know, for people like Sky and for kind of independent broadcasters, one single promo can be used 15,000 times across all the different arms of a broadcaster such as Sky. So, you know, when you're thinking about, oh, I just want to be in Killing Eve, it's like, well, I would just want to be like Sky Football Saturday Night Roundup promo, or some sort of, I don't know, it's like a boxing match with somebody, and they're just like playing the promo again and again, you know. So yeah, it's, you know, that's a real opportunity. And, you know, most of that music, a lot of that music is production music. And a final kind of point of interest about that, and I kind of think this has a relationship to composing as well. The biggest chicken and egg thing that exists for any person trying to get into composing for the screen is that you find, so let's say there's somebody in like, I don't know, like in a college in Inverness who's like a young filmmaker, and they get a grant from Creative Scotland to do their first film. And then you hear about it and you're like, oh, that's my mate Morag's mate. And then you go to them and go, oh, I heard you're doing a short film and I'd love to pitch for it. And they go, okay, can I see your show reel? And you go, I haven't got a show reel. but I know it'd be really good. And they're like, how can I tell if you'd be any good? Because so it is this chicken and egg thing. It's that, you know, how, if you want to start doing composition and you haven't got a show reel, but you want to show people that the music that you write can work the picture, how do you kind of start to do that? And it is difficult, and there are different ways of doing it. When I was starting, ironically, I did it through stuff that I had synced, and then kind of some of these kind of production music, pieces of music that I had written that ended up being on TV shows. So this was not stuff that I had scored to picture, but as I said at the very start of this chat, it was enough that the stuff that I was doing was kind of compelling and working to picture for me to then be able to go, okay, I think that I could write and compose to picture. So there are ways of getting around that chicken and egg thing. And I think it's really important that you think, if you're interested in the composition part of things, that you think as creatively as possible as to how you can start to kind of articulate that towards emerging opportunities, you know, in a way that shows that your music will work the picture, you know, so that you can kind of crack some of those difficult conversations at the start of that journey with people like directors and producers who are going, well, I'm hearing that you're saying that you think it'll work, but you can't show me any examples of your music to pictures. So a way that I personally have often encouraged people to look at, and this is something that we've done when we've been pitching for genres of work outside of work that we've done, is that we pulled public domain footage from archive.org, archive.org, which is this vast repository of kind of public domain video and audio content. And we would pull down, you know, if we were pitching for, you know, the first time we started pitching for animation stuff, we pulled down old 1950s Russian and kind of Eastern European animation work, and then we rescored it. And then we would make a reel of rescored animation work, and we would pitch that out to people and being like, you see, we can write to cartoons because we've done it, not for Nickelodeon at that stage, but we started to kind of get conversations going because we found workarounds that meant that we weren't having that awkward chicken and egg thing of, well, you know, you say you want to do it, but like, how can you do it? Because you can't show me that you can do it. I think, and this is an important general point, I think in pitching to anybody involved in kind of film, television and whatnot, it is really, really important that you do not forget, these are visual people. They think visually all the time. So in whatever way you kind of pitch to them, it has to be sort of visually stimulating. You can't pitch to somebody in Adidas, let's say, and have like a really poorly made Wix website. Now, I know that, you know, in the kind of, you know, a musician wakes up in the morning and could have a list as long as their blooming arm between, you know, streaming and Spotify and PR and online, stacking assets and TweetDeck and I totally get all of that. But I think specific to this kind of music and image thing, you must be really cognizant of the idea that these are visual, creative people. So in whatever way you start to kind of pitch to them, just be mindful, you know, first impression goes a really, really long way. You know, even in, you know, the website that we run, the stuff that we do, you know, we do it all through things like Squarespace. We do it all internally. We don't pay any money for any of that kind of stuff. We just worked out how to do it. And ours is not a particularly wonderful example of a composer's website. But I will tell you this, these people spend all day either shooting or filming or in post-production or in front of screens. So, you know, it's staggeringly obvious, but most people, or a lot of people, get it wrong when they start to pitch, that they have not, you know, got the articulation of who they are and what they are about right before they start knocking on doors. And you can't make a first impression twice. The amount of people who have emailed us looking for placements or internships, or, you know, and we run, you know, like placements all the time. But it's always disappointing when someone emails us and they haven't even sent a link to music, let alone a link to a kind of website, even as a kind of, you know, or something on SoundCloud, or, you know, like here's a Vimeo, you know, 2 minutes just with some of my stuff laid out to picture. That's it. You know, those things are so important. I believe that about every kind of part of the music industry. I think there's a big thing now because of the kind of, you know, democratization of all of this technology. It just has, it's almost kind of like overly empowered people to come out of the traps too soon and pull back the curtain too soon. And like that is as true within kind of sync and composing as it is for artists rushing to kind of get something on Bandcamp, to get something on TuneCore, to get something, you know, on streaming platforms. So in any of this pitching, you know, think about the person reading the email and then clicking through to the website or to your composition page or whatever, and kind of, will they be kind of like, will their aesthetic sensibilities find a kind of like comfortable alignment with what it is that you're doing? And that's kind of like one of the last things I want to say. I've been lucky to be doing some work with University of the Highlands and Islands and kind of talking about sync and, you know, and how this part of the region can look at sort of articulating the opportunity of, you know, taking this kind of extraordinary talent that exists within this part of the world and, you know, packaging it up and finding ways to present it towards people. And what is more true now than ever is that, you know, there is a more understandable, authentic voice in what is happening in this part of the world. You know, I am afraid to say it is stuff like filming that's happening, or even things like Outlander, that mean that, you know, in the same way as when Game of Thrones came to Northern Ireland 10 or 15 years ago, it transformed our film and television industries, because what happened was it skilled up a generation of people so that when HBO left, you know, Disney came in, and when Disney left, you know, flipping, I don't know, DreamWorks came in. It meant that all these other opportunities started springing up more and more and more. But what was also important for people like me, who were kind of starting as composers at that time, was that we could articulate to people like who we were and what we're about and the kind of idiom that we worked within. And that became really important, because if you sort of think about it, you have more interesting stories to tell than if you were pitching from flipping, oh, I don't even want to say a city, because then I'll just get in trouble. But yeah, you know, there's kind of more of a sort of understanding, and kind of, I think it's what happened in Northern Ireland, as I said, 10 or 15 years ago. We always struggled, as I'm sure maybe people from the Highlands and Islands have struggled. We struggled about being just confused for Dublin and for the south of Ireland and for, you know, everything that was going on there. And we were absolutely kind of the poor cousin in those conversations, so that when it came to kind of, you know, looking at, you know, the robustness of the, you know, because I do believe in starting local in terms of, you know, it's worked for us, and the work that we do for Disney or Nickelodeon or whoever, it always has kind of local elements to it as well. We historically struggled. We were definitely the poor cousin. And in some ways, I suppose, you know, the Highlands and Islands had a different understanding compared to, you know, Edinburgh and Glasgow. But that is all changing. So I think, like, to find and articulate your authentic voices as part of what is going on in the wider creative industries now, it seems to be really kind of like a simpatico thing that is going on. And I suppose that's kind of, you know, it's a sort of positivity that I want to leave you with. You know, I don't work in London. London, you know, and I have a studio in Belfast, and I live in the middle of nowhere. I can see the sea if I look out that window. You know, I don't feel the need to be going to London all the time. I've built a kind of really regional creative industries business working in music and visual media. And the reason I keep coming back to XpoNorth is absolutely because, you know, I believe in that. I believe where I come from. I believe, you know, like, I'm a Northern Ireland dweller wanting to work in the creative industries in Northern Ireland. I don't want to move to Berlin particularly, thank you. And that's what I've always believed in terms of coming up and being, you know, at XpoNorth every year and kind of seeing how evolved the sector is starting to become. I think the things that people like XpoNorth and the university are doing are extremely exciting. And I think the more that you empower yourselves as creators to really kind of, you know, think about what the pathway is, cut out all the kind of extraneous stuff, be really kind of like ruthless in terms of your understanding, learn from how people have done this really badly and learn from those other 999 emails that do go in, you know, the spam bin of music gatekeepers. You know, that's how I did it. And the reason I come back every year to speak is because that's how you will do it as well. It might be time to do some questions. Now, there's a Q&A thing at the bottom, and given that I think Katie wrote something into it, I would presume that any of you can write a question in and then I can reply to the question. What I will try and do is I will try and make my replies both be kind of specific to what you're asking, but also hopefully have kind of like a bit of relevance for all of you who are listening. So if I just say, does anybody want to ask a question, then I'm hoping that the little Q&A thing that I can see, which says one, which was just somebody going, yes, we can all see you sitting there, will then maybe have another question. Okay, here's a question. It has worked. Excellent. Brian, not a question, just a note of thanks. Ah, thank you, Brian. Is that Brian who I know? I wonder if it is. I don't know. Anyway, well, that's very kind, Brian. Thank you very much. Yes, it is. Okay, excellent. So yeah, do any of you have? I'm really like, I'm happy to talk about anything to do with this. I'm very honest because I'm not pitching music and stuff. I can tell you absolutely, you know, how I believe things work. And oh, okay, Siobhan. Oh, brilliant. Hello. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read out the question, or I'm going to kind of like press it, and then I can do the answer. So Siobhan says, I was recently asked by an LA company to create a library for them as a composer, but I don't currently have any speakers. Okay, which speakers do you prefer to use to mix? Okay, brilliant. Yeah, so what speakers do we use? Well, you know, it's funny you should say that, because actually, so what happened was we have a studio in Belfast and we had to pack it up really quite quickly in order to set up all these things. And so in Belfast, I use those little Genelec speakers. So I think they cost about £400 for a pair. They are really industry standard, but they are the small ones. That is quite expensive. I do appreciate that as well. So underneath that, I have a set of M-Audio speakers. They cost about 70 or 80 pounds. So if you connect with Alex or somebody from XpoNorth afterwards and send that question in, or send it to the admin at scoredrawmusic.com email address, and I'll send you the links to the speakers I have. So that's kind of like two examples. A pair for about £400, which are, you know, small but industry standard, and they're brilliant. And then a smaller pair for about 70 or 80 pounds. Okay, I can see some more questions. Bear with me. It's my first library. Congratulations, by the way, Siobhan. That is absolutely fantastic that you've been asked by a company to create a library. I think it's amazing. Oh, anyone can write a question, but only you can see it. Okay. 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 So this is from Mobo. At what stage do you get involved in the process of getting music scored? Okay, that's a really good question. So we like to come in as early as possible into a creative process. It's really of benefit that we come in, well, we would always come in before filming. And the reason, Momo, that we do that is because there could be music requirements that we need to look at before filming starts. So obviously for animation, if there's a song, we have to write the song before the voice records, before the animated, before the filming. But for live action shows that we would do, or for documentary work that we would do, we would absolutely come in as early as possible. And you've reminded me that I'm going to give you all a really good tip. So I literally did one of these 2 days ago for something. So we meet with the director or a producer or a kind of a creative team, and we start talking about something, you know, a new project or whatever, and it's like, okay, so what do we think it might sound like? So there's kind of two things that are really good for people who are composers. So the first thing is, and this is really important, you have to learn as much as you can about film composers, so that when you're talking about film and TV music, you need to know the difference between, you know, what Alexandre Desplat sounds like, as opposed to Clint Mansell, as opposed to Cliff Martinez, as opposed to Daniel Pemberton, as opposed to, you know, Nanita Desai or Carly Pardey. It's really handy to be able to kind of reference to directors and producers, and understand, okay, this person does modern classical, this person does kind of like trad music with a kind of twist, this person just, you know, like Patrick Doyle. What does Patrick Doyle's score sound like? He's a brilliant Scottish composer. So it's important, for the composers among you, or those of you who are thinking about composition, it's really important to kind of like get to grips with film music, so that whenever you meet directors and producers, because I tell you what, they will bloomin' know about film music, because they will temp score, use pieces of film music whenever they're doing cutting and editing. And then the second thing that we always do at the start of any project, and as I said, I literally did one 2 days ago, we do a mood board. So that is literally just like a YouTube playlist, of music that we think is like, okay, we think this could kind of be the sound of this project. So I did a playlist that was, it was 3 pieces of artist music, all kind of female gothic noir stuff. It was two cues from 2 game soundtracks, and then it was a bunch of cues from some film soundtracks, and then maybe like 1 other piece of music. So it ended up being about 15 pieces of music. And then we pitched that, and we're like, okay, this is us starting a creative conversation with you. Directors and producers find it really hard to articulate what they want, but if you can stimulate them thinking about music and creativity as early on as possible, and if you can do things like being cognizant of film composers and their sounds, and then doing mood boards, you know, it's like, it's just Pinterest, right? That's all it is. We do them on YouTube. A lot of people do them on Spotify. I don't have a Spotify account. Yeah, I'm one of those people. There's enough music in my life. I don't need any more. So I get annoyed when people send me Spotify playlists, because I don't have Spotify. So yeah, YouTube, you know, it's all there. It's all free. It's streamable. It's downloadable. So long answer, but as early as possible. Absolutely as early as possible. So at script stage, I suppose, would be what I would say. And I think it's like, it will benefit you to come in as early as possible. In terms of sync, obviously, people don't even start thinking about that until filming is wrapped and people are kind of starting to go into post-production. So sync is completely different to composed. Those conversations. So if, for example, you know, there was something, I don't know, you know, filming like a drama show, if you're aware and it was filming nearby and you were thinking, oh, I should, you know, if principal filming has stopped, that's a really good time to start pitching music. Yeah, just before post-production starts. Okay, I can see another couple of questions, so I'm going to read the question out. Oh, okay. Mark, for for fashion and brands, are they interested in one-stop, unpublished artists? So this goes back to what I was saying before. So the answer that you will hear from a lot of people, like music supervisors, would be, oh yeah, we're totally interested in like unpublished one-stops. But, you know, per se, but then the next question would be, okay, so then how do I actually get my music into the mix? So, you know, I mean, it's quite a broad question, isn't it? For fashion and brands, are they interested in one-stop unpublished? So, you know, the answer is yes, but I feel it's like the answer is like, yes, but then there's all this other stuff that you're going to have to do as well. So for example, I'm just going to give you an example about Adidas, because I know how Adidas work. And maybe that'll kind of, you know, be a starting point, sort of, you know. And again, you can email me afterwards if I don't make this clear. So for big brands, they have in-house music teams. So that means there is somebody In fact, I brought him to, and actually brought one of his colleagues to XpoNorth, who look after all the music for Adidas. So for Adidas, it's a company called Record Play. They have studios in London, and I think Berlin, and I think Barcelona. And they are the place, you know, if you had music that you felt would be kind of, you know, working, then you would absolutely, you know, they're not scared about one-stop unpublished stuff. In fact, if it's super edgy, super ahead of the curve, they will be actively interested in it, because all those people, you know, are looking, yeah, so cliched, isn't it? It's kind of like they're looking for the kind of something that no one else will have yet. I think Record Play are a brilliant example of a company who are really kind of open to people pitching. They're an awesome company. There is, you know, a girl there called Lauren, who, you know, if you looked at some of the work that Lauren has supervised, and then you had, you know, you had music, and you're like, oh, hey, Lauren, you know, I was just on a webinar there with Mark from Scoredraw, and, you know, I do this music, and it's one stop, and, you know, I don't know, you know, the kind of ways you could, you know, you could pitch some stuff there. That would be a way of doing it. There are also, in terms of fashion, there are companies in London, like there's a company called Pitch and Sync, so PITCH, and then SMYC. I think they do a lot of work in fashion as well. Again, with any of these companies, you need to kind of go look at the company, look at what they do, look at their show reels, look at all their recent work, look at the campaigns that they've worked on, kind of cross-reference that against some of the music that you're making. And then if you feel, okay, that there's a potential opening here, you know, then to do the super smart thing, you know, with them. I think like they just did a deal with someone like AEG Live or something that's on their Twitter. So you'd be like, oh, hey, Alex, congratulations on the AEG Live thing. And I really love that kind of Burberry campaign you did. You know, I do this music and it's like this, and, you know, that would be how you could do that. So it's like anything. It's like, yes, 100%. Of course, people will be interested in anything that's a brilliant one-stop unpublished piece of music, but you just have to kind of consider, like, what is the way to get it as close to the hands of the right person? Okay, that was a good question. Hey, Anna Wendy. So yes, okay. You mentioned three things: specially commissioned music, sync, and then library music. What is the split between usage for music supervisors? Do musicians tend to just stick with one of the elements, i.e. just be especially? So what Anna Wendy is saying, there are three types of music that I mentioned. There's sync, there's composed music, and then there's library music. In terms, it's a really interesting question. So how much library music do music supervisors use as opposed to sync? And then do musicians tend to just be just a composer or just a library writer? So the first answer is, and interestingly enough, this is really borne out in kind of work that has been done in kind of advertising, especially. There's more library music being used in advertising than ever before. There is tons of library music being used. It's a really big thing, because if you think about it, it's like, if it's an awesome piece of library music, it's a one-stop, you know, it's on a library website, it's on Cavendish, you know, you don't have to negotiate. It's a set fee. You just pull it down, you drop it into your cut. If it works well, you've got the stems, so you can kind of make it, you know, make it work. So there's tons of library that is being used. Library is, you know, library music used to be these terrible CDs that, you know, used to just be like really cheaply recorded, bad MIDI. You know, library music is, it's a massive thing. And you know, if I was in Inverness, or if I was, you know, on the island of Egg, you know, next to, I don't know, Lost Map in the next caravan, and sitting there with like my guitar and my thing, I'd be like, I'm doing some library music. And I would get lots of, you know, people like Barry Nisbet, who's been working with us, or local players, and I'd be like, let's write some library albums. In terms of your question as to, do people just tend to be composers or library writers, or actually, I think for people like us who are composers, we don't do any library, and we've done very little library because we've been lucky enough to always be in commission for work. But a lot of composers would do library as well. Yeah, absolutely. Lots and lots of composers, if they're not on a job, they'll just kind of write a library album. So I know a friend of mine who's a composer, Sheridan, Northern Irish composer, did a lot of things like Silent Witness. So he would write, when he's not being commissioned, he'll write about kind of 80 pieces of library music, maybe over the course of a calendar year. And he just feed those in to different people, and that will just kind of tick over. Now, it is a long game, obviously. You know, you may not get paid for a couple of years, but it works. It absolutely works. So I think, you know, we all have this kind of portfolio career thing. And I think, yeah. And so I think people do lots of different stuff. And as I said, kind of 10 or 15 minutes ago as well, the other thing that is really important is that it then allows you to kind of like slightly, if you get a library piece that's used in a, you know, in a BBC Alba documentary, you know, you can kind of cut that into your next show reel, and it, you know, you didn't compose it, but it's your piece of music and it's working to picture. So it's kind of creating an argument that I think is really important. So yes, thank you for, this has been awesome. Ah, thanks. Hey, Mark, this is Duncan. Thanks very much. Can I ask about music sync agents? Yes, absolutely. You mentioned Woodwork and Secret Road. As a traditional musician and composer that crosses over into classical also within the field, could you recommend any particular music agents that might lean towards this type of music? Thanks, Duncan. Okay, so the first thing I would say, so as a traditional music and composer, Duncan, this is probably something that I would need to do a little bit more research on, and I don't want to kind of set you down a pathway and then give you bad information. I know that there are definitely, in Ireland, where I'm from, in Dublin, there are people who are sync agents who work in traditional music here, and definitely there was an independent publisher here who, if you kind of remember back, do you remember back to those, the Robert Downey Jr. Sherlock Holmes films, those ones, and Hans Zimmer did that kind of like sort of like Irish, sort of almost like, I don't know, kind of Irish traveling score or something, but they used a lot of library, and then they used a lot of kind of independent trad, which they got from yeah, an independent agent. So in answer to your question, there are some. There is, I think I mentioned this the last time when I came up to do a winter talk at XpoNorth. For those of you who are members of AIM, AIM, there is an electronic guide, synchronization, a global guide that will also list a lot of music agents. So you can look at that as well, but that's only if you're an AIM member. Duncan, if you email me at that admin, ADMIN, at scoredrawmusic.com, I'll see if I can find out more information that might be helpful to you. Okay, Alan. Hey, you mentioned recording a cover and then sending it to Cobalt. What's the correct protocol for making sure a cover is ready to be synced, i.e. if you can't get a reply from the original publisher? Yeah, that is a really good question. So that's a brilliant question. It has been the case historically that, yes, if you did, let's say, I don't know, you did a cover of, oh, okay, so let's say you were the Lemonheads and you did a cover of Mrs. Robinson by Simon and Garfunkel. So then you would, you know, it's a bad example because you're the Lemonheads, but anyway, you know what I mean, small band. And then you would send it to their publisher, and then you'd be like, hey, we've done this, you know, just have it in mind if you're ever pitching out covers. So if you can't get a reply from the original publisher, yeah, that is tricky, Alan, because then if you were pitching it, you'd be like, I don't even know if this is clearable. You know, it's a bit, okay, you know, an easy example would be like, okay, so, you know, if I did a cover of Don't Stop Believing by Journey, you know, I pretty much know that I can't pitch that because they have withdrawn all their repertoire from, you know, from blanket licensing agreements, and they now just want to kind of control that flow of information themselves after making so much money from Glee. the only thing I can think is if you can find other covers of the same piece of music, then it would, that have been used, then it would suggest that the artist is open to the song being covered. That, I mean, that seems like, yeah, that seems hard to do. It's tough. You really need to find out from the publisher. I mean, that is the way of doing it, because you don't want to waste your time and do the amazing album of, I don't know, well, okay, yeah, Kate Bush covers, and then, and then go to her publisher, and her publisher's like, oh, it's Kate Bush. She doesn't let covers happen. Why didn't you think about that like 6 months ago when you were doing the record? So, without the publisher's permission, I mean, we did a cover of Holding Out for a Hero in the summer, last summer, for an animation thing. And, it had to go to Jim Steinman to get approval. That was what had to happen. There was no way to kind of circumnavigate that. So yeah, that's a tricky one. The only thing I can say on is, if, I don't know, if you can find other covers that have been in the public domain, then that would suggest that it's possible. So you would think, I mentioned Heroes by David Bowie, and you would kind of think that was a sort of uncoverable piece of music. And yet, I think last year or the year before, it was either like a Heineken or an Audi or a something advert that came out in Europe, and it was like a cover of Heroes. And it was like, oh my God, right, really? The estate of David Bowie is just letting people cover this AAA repertoire? Huh, who knew? So yeah, that's my only thinking about that. Keep trying with the publisher, or find other versions that exist, and presume that might mean they might be into it. But you can do the album, you can still put it on, Spotify potentially and stuff, but just don't pitch it for Apple. Okay, Anonymous, great session. How quickly would I need to be able to get all the assets required to a supervisor if I was approached? That is a brilliant question. And the answer is horrible. The answer is like half an hour. It really has to be as quickly as possible. I mean, this is one of these kind of like massively annoying things that you just hear about all the time. And just like, forgive me for all the cliches, but here's how it is. There's a lady who's editing something in a post house in Los Angeles for a trailer company called Ignition, and it is 10:30 in the morning, and she is on and I've seen this happen for one trailer, she is on edit number 53, version 13 of the cut, and she comes across your piece of music, and she's like, oh my God, this is it. This is what I was looking for. But it's going live at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and because it's 10:30 US time, 11, 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so 6:30 UK time, which is actually just about sort of manageable. So she emails you and be like, I need the instrumental, and I need the full mix, and I need the a cappella within 30 minutes, because I'm presenting this cut to Paramount at 11. But like, I've temped in like a 320K MP3, and it just sings. So in situations like that, it is like half an hour or the gig's off. Those are kind of extreme situations. In other situations, things could live in the cut for like, days or weeks. I mean, I personally, I have to be totally honest, if I email somebody and they take more than 24 hours to come back to me, I presume like, okay, like they don't work in music anymore. They must now work in, I don't know, the civil service. I think like, you have to be quick. If you're lucky enough to get one of these opportunities, you have to be really quick. Now, this is difficult, because then what I'm saying is you have to have all your assets ready, for this tiny possibility that at an arbitrary point in time, 10 p.m. on a Sunday night, an email might come in, asking for some assets for a thing. So you've done all this work, that, but that is like, that's the way it goes. So that's a really long way and a long way of saying like quick, really quick, really, really, really quick. What are the fee negotiation differences between sync, composed, and library music? Oh, that is a good question. Okay, of those, I would say the lowest upfront fees will be for library music. For sync, the place that you will get the most, if you know, just to kind of like do the money thing, the place where there is the most money still in placement is North American film trailers. Nothing apart from obviously, you know, like a big advertising placement, but let's be honest, big advertising placements, you know, it's Frank Sinatra or Queen, right? For like an emerging piece of repertoire, the place where you can still get big upfront fees for sync are trailers. Obviously, fee negotiations for sync in the UK for stuff that's under the blanket license, there is no negotiation. It's PRS registered. They'll use it anyway. You'll just get some PRS later. In the UK, anything like BBC and ITV, there's no fee. There's no fee. All you get is your PRS. In North America, you get fees. You have to do a sync license for every kind of piece of music that is used, and there tends to be a fee. So for sync in the UK, for that, no fees. Outside of trailers, advertising, you know, you will still probably get the most money for sync. Library will pay the least amount of money, but library is kind of like a volume thing, right? You know, if you think about it, you could get one sync for one piece of music, but if you're that composer friend of mine who's doing 80 pieces of music for library a year, if he's getting kind of 10 or 15 of those in, you know, in Ready Steady Cook or, you know, or MasterChef, you know, something that's on network BBC One, you know, whatever the rate is, like £60 a minute, and it's just like sitting under there for 2 or 3 minutes, then the kind of cumulative effect of that will earn more money. And the way it works with composed music is you absolutely still get upfront fees. It is less pro rata than sync, which is just for one piece of music. So for, you know, for this show that we're working on at the moment, this is like 52 episodes. Each episode is 11 minutes long. It'll take about 2 years on and off to do. So we'll get a kind of like a fee when we sign the contract, then a fee a bit later on, then a fee a bit later on. And then we have the long game of the royalties, which is kind of like more what we're looking for than the fee, to be honest. So those are the kind of differences, I suppose. For sync, you know, the fees can be good, the upfront fees, and for sync, because you wrote the piece of music, you'll tend to keep all of your royalties. For library music, it will absolutely be split between you and the library. And for composed music, again, you know, as composers, we get 50% of anything we write, pretty much. And that's not a negotiation, that's just how it works. And contract arrangements, well, I sort of touched that a bit. So sync license, so let's say I'm, you know, in a band in Inverness, and I've written a song. I didn't write it for a Doritos advert. So if Doritos want to use it, the contract will be a non-exclusive license for 6 months for Doritos, for online, theatrical, and broadcast media, with a fee of, I don't know, £10,000 aside, and then I will get PRS after that if it's on, you know, the television. For the contract arrangement for composed music is the person who's commissioning the music owns the master recording for the rest of time. The reason for that is, if you kind of think about it, you know, they don't want to have to renegotiate. You know, no one knew that iPads were going to be invented or that streaming was going to happen. So pieces of repertoire that were written 20, 30 years ago have to be renegotiated as new types of media come on stream. The way it works now for composers is any contract, it's like all media, all territories in the earth and the rest of space in perpetuity forever. So for the master recording, they buy it all out forever because they just don't want to do another negotiation. And then, as I said, a percentage of the royalties. And then for library music, it's non-exclusive, again, because you could have one piece of library music used in lots of different things. And then you just get a percentage of the publishing. Right, I'm going to look at these. Who's a publisher? who's the publisher? This is from Alan. Who in the publisher company would you approach? Oh, Alan, sorry, this is the question before about if I did a cover for, Nick Cave is on Cobalt, and I did a cover of Red Right Hand. So I suppose there's kind of two people that you would maybe approach. You would absolutely approach the sync team. So, Cobalt, like Sony, like Universal, like Warner's, like, mid-tier labels. Ninja Tune have a sync department. Domino have a sync department. So you would absolutely, if it was a publisher like that, you would pitch it to the sync department. You'd be like, hey, here's my cover of, Everywhere by Fleetwood Mac. I mean, that is a coverable song. Some people, and this is amazing, and I've said this before again, so forgive me. Some people will let you know what songs they will accept covers of. I was once at a thing in Los Angeles, and it was somebody from Cobalt's sync team, I think, in Los Angeles, and they had a piece of paper. They were like, here's some of the stuff that we always love to hear covers. We love to hear covers of the Lindsey Buckingham Fleetwood Mac stuff, but not the Christine McVie stuff, or something like that anyway. So sometimes you can go to publishers if you catch them on the right time, the right day or whatever, and go like, hey, are you, what are you into having covers of? What are you kind of into, people pitching? And they'll be like, oh, well, you're like, we always love covers of, I Can See Clearly Now. That's a really good example, actually. That is, there's a, like I've covered that for a pitch for a boot set or something. So there's always those things whereby, covers of stuff like that. It's like the more the merrier. So you would pitch them to the sync department. Absolutely. As I said to you before about the kind of Jim Steinman thing, and funnily enough, the guy from Sony who I had to clear that with was a guy that I met at XpoNorth, and it was amazing because literally 2 or 3 months later we were asked to do this thing. I was like, who's the person? I was like, oh my god, he was at XpoNorth. We did a panel together. So that was that was the power of XpoNorth to kind of help make something happen. But he worked in that sync department, so you could reach out to people like that if you get them on a good day, and if you can kind of send them like 3 amazing covers that you've done already, being like, here is my dark gothic piano cover of, not, I don't know, You Got the Love, not You Got the Love, something else, something more surprising, and a couple of other things. It's like, have you anything, you're looking at? It's possible. Now, obviously, my cover of, The Winner Takes It All, if that goes towards flipping Jaguar advert, ABBA are going to get a lot more money for the publishing than I'm going to get from my little new master recording. And that's one of the kind of quid pro quos about doing covers. And it's why people love covers, because it's cheap to clear the master recording. The publishing is still ABBA, but it's like, it's cheap to clear the master. So don't expect that you'll be getting the same upfront fee as kind of ABBA if you do a cover. So I hope that answered your question. So there's somebody who's got their hand up. I don't know, maybe that it's Siobhan, but then I think maybe I answered your question. So, oh my goodness, look, it's nearly 2:30. I think I've tried anyway to cover as much as possible. As I've kind of been saying already, we're really easy to find online. It's Score Draw Music. And in the thing that XpoNorth pitched out about this, there was an email address which was admin@Scoredraw Music. I always kind of feel in Q&As that there'll be stuff that I won't have covered. So please, if there's anything that I haven't covered, or if there's more kind of insight or information, or if there's something you wanted to ask but you just didn't want me to read it out, which I totally understand, and do a bad answer to it, then like you must feel free to email me. Thank you all very much as well for sticking with me. That's absolutely incredible, and I feel humbled. I'm sorry that XpoNorth isn't happening this year. I was involved in kind of putting together some brilliant people who I hope that will bring up your part of the world next year, and see you then. And if you come next year, say that you were on this crazy Zoom thing. And like a massive thank you to everybody at XpoNorth for helping put this together. I hope you've enjoyed it. It's going to be quite a weird way to sign off now, because I'm just going to shut it down and then there'll be silence in this room. I'll just have to go back to work. Oh, what a miserable thought. And all of you stay safe. You know, this too shall pass, I promise. And I will see you all at some point in the future. Thank you very much. 2:28, we did it. Toodle pip.